We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The acrid smell of motor oil and premium leather cleaner hung in the air as Cody Tucker's wrench clicked against the titanium bolts of a Ferrari F8 Tributo's engine block. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Tucker Performance, the Manhattan skyline glittered against the night sky, a reminder of why his shop had become the go-to destination for Wall Street's elite car enthusiasts. Mr. Tucker? Marcus, his lead technician, approached with a tablet. The Pagani owner just called again. Wants to know if we can bump up his service appointment. Cody straightened from the engine bay, his shoulders protesting after 14 hours of work. Tell him we're booked solid for the next 3 weeks. Even Saudi princes have to wait their turn. The comment wasn't an exaggeration. In just 8 years, Tucker Performance had grown from a small garage to the most trusted name in exotic car modifications on the East Coast. Their client list read like a Forbes 400 roster: hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, international royalty. The shop's reputation for discretion and expertise had made them the only choice for clients whose vehicles cost more than most people's homes. Another 16-hour day? Nick Dillon's voice echoed through the workshop. His business partner stood in the doorway of their office, military posture unchanged from his Army intelligence days. You've got port duty at 5. Cody ignored the concern in Nick's voice, focusing on the final adjustments to the Ferrari's engine. The port job had started as a way to fund the shop's early days. Now, 5 years later, it was the only way to keep up with Maxine's expanding lifestyle expectations. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? Nick pressed, moving closer. The fluorescent lights highlighted the worry lines around his eyes. The shop cleared 7 figures last quarter. You don't need 2 jobs anymore. Try telling that to the Bellhaven real estate market. Cody reached for a torque wrench. Or Maxine's country club friends. Nick's jaw tightened. The same friends who all work for Koch Industries? Like Amanda Reynolds, who just upgraded from a schoolteacher's salary to a penthouse after her divorce. Don't start. Cody's grip on the wrench tightened. Maxine earned that senior counsel position. Koch Industries is a Fortune 500 company. They pay accordingly. They pay for something, Nick muttered. Remember when she used to bring you dinner during late nights? Before Koch took her under his mentorship? 5 years ago, when Maxine had first joined Koch Industries' legal department, she'd been proud of Tucker Performance. She'd spend evenings in the office above the shop, working on her own cases while he finished with clients' cars. They'd order takeout, talk about their dreams, plan their future. Now, she could barely look at the place without wincing. The legal world's different, Cody said. But the words rang hollow. Koch runs a global operation. The expectations aren't the only thing that's changed. Nick moved to block Cody's reach for another tool. Have you seen this month's credit card statements? $5,000 at Neiman Marcus, $3,000 at L'Hermitage Spa, $4,000 at that boutique in Georgetown. That's more than most of our technicians make in 2 months. I've seen them. Cody turned back to the engine, but Nick wasn't finished. She's in the Greenwich Country Club now, right? The one that costs more annually than our first year's lease? And that new tennis club in Westport? The one where half the members are Koch Industries executives' wives. She's networking. She's changing. Nick's voice softened. And not just her spending habits. When's the last time she wore anything that wasn't designer? When's the last time she was happy with a quiet night at home instead of some charity gala? Hell, when's the last time she looked at this place, the business you built from nothing, with anything but embarrassment? The questions hit too close to home. 5 years ago, Maxine had been proud to be a mechanic's wife. She'd worn her department store clothes with confidence, joked about being the only public defender who brought her own lunch to work. Then came the job at Koch Industries. The changes had been subtle at first. Designer labels replacing department store brands. Country club memberships replacing their weekly dates at the local pub. Every achievement at Tucker Performance was met with increasingly faint praise, then indifference, then barely concealed disdain. You should see how she looks at me at those Koch events, Cody said quietly, like I'm something she scraped off her Louboutins. Last week, she actually asked if I could skip the next charity gala. Said my hands were too calloused for the crowd. Nick leaned against the Ferrari's pristine hood. Remember that Lamborghini that came in last week? Coke's personal car? The Aventador SVJ. What about it? The wear patterns on the passenger seat. And that perfume. The same one Maxine started wearing after her promotion. Don't. Cody's voice cracked like a whip. Whatever you're thinking, don't say it. They worked in silence for the next hour, finishing the Ferrari service. When they finally closed up, the digital clock showed 12:34 a.m. In less than 5 hours, Cody would need to be at the port, overseeing luxury car imports for people who spent more on their weekend toys than he made in a year. Get some rest, Nick called as Cody climbed into his truck, a 10-year-old Ford that Maxine refused to be seen in. And think about what I said. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and exhaustion. The house, a 4-bedroom colonial that Maxine now called embarrassingly modest, was dark when he pulled in. Either she was asleep or, more likely, still out at another Coke Industries event. Inside, the transformation of their home mirrored Maxine's own evolution. Designer furniture had replaced their comfortable old pieces. The walls, once covered with photos of their early years together, now displayed only recent images. Maxine at Coke Industries events, Maxine with her new country club friends, Maxine standing beside Guillermo Coke himself at charity galas. Cody grabbed a beer and sank into his recliner. The one piece of furniture she hadn't replaced with something more suitable. In 4 hours, he'd need to be at the port. After that, another full day at the shop. The exhaustion was bone deep, but it was better than lying in bed alone, wondering if his wife would come home at all. The downtown Greenwich coffee shop hummed with the quiet energy of old money and discretion. Barry Chapman, his weathered hands spread over a thick manila folder, studied Cody Tucker across the table. The retired FBI agent had chosen this location carefully, close enough to Coke Industries headquarters to seem natural, far enough to avoid unwanted attention. I wouldn't be showing you this if I didn't think you needed to see it, Barry said. His voice pitched low despite the ambient noise of ceramic cups and muted conversations. And I need you to understand, what I'm about to share isn't just about your wife. It's about a pattern that's been developing at Coke Industries for years. Cody stared into his untouched coffee. He hadn't wanted to take this meeting. Nick had arranged it, practically forcing him to attend. With all due respect, Mr. Chapman, I don't see how my marriage is any of your business. Barry's lined face softened slightly. Call me Barry. And it became my business when my daughter Sarah started working for Coke Industries 3 years ago. She was happily married, had 2 kids, made partner at her law firm. Within 6 months, she was filing for divorce. Within a year, she had a consulting position in Dubai. Haven't seen my grandkids since. The pain in his voice made Cody look up. Barry's eyes held a mixture of grief and determination that seemed too raw to be professional interest. Sarah wasn't the first, Barry continued, opening the folder. And your Maxine won't be the last. Guillermo Coke doesn't just run a company. He collects people's lives, especially their wives. He began laying out photographs, documents, and handwritten notes across the table. It starts the same way every time. He hires attractive, married women into mid-level positions, usually legal, sometimes finance or operations. Always women with potential, but who've been overlooked. Women married to good men with modest lifestyles. Cody's eyes were drawn to a series of photographs. Women at corporate events, all standing next to Coke, tall, distinguished-looking, with silver hair and aristocratic bearing. In each photo, Coke's hand rested possessively on the small of the woman's back. He mentors them personally, Barry explained, his finger tapping each photo. Takes a special interest in their careers. The promotions come quickly, along with invitations to exclusive events. Their tastes start to change. Designer clothes, luxury cars, country club memberships. Their husbands can't keep up with the new lifestyle, no matter how hard they try. The sick feeling in Cody's stomach grew as he recognized the pattern. Maxine's sudden obsession with designer labels. The string of expensive club memberships. The constant pressure to move to a better neighborhood. Then comes the isolation, Barry continued, laying out more documents. They stop spending time with old friends, old family. Their social circle becomes exclusively Coke Industries people. Specifically, other women who've gone through the same transformation. The criticism of their home life increases. Their husbands' jobs become embarrassing rather than respectable. Their marriage becomes a source of shame rather than pride. Every word felt like a direct hit, describing exactly what had happened over the past 5 years. Maxine's gradual withdrawal from their old friends, her increasing disdain for Tucker performance, the way she'd stopped visiting him at work, stopped talking about their future together. The women form a kind of inner circle, Barry explained, spreading out more photos. See these events? Private dinners, exclusive retreats, members-only clubs. They reinforce each other's new values, new expectations. Coke makes sure they're always surrounded by proof of what their life could be. If they're willing to leave their old one behind, Cody recognized several faces in the photos. Amanda Reynolds, who'd left her teacher husband last year. Patricia Sullivan, whose contractor spouse had died in a mysterious accident. And everywhere, in every image, Guillermo Coke presided over his carefully curated collection of transformed wives. "Why are you showing me all this?" Cody asked, though he already knew the answer. Barry gathered the documents slowly, his movements deliberate. "Because right now, your wife is at a crossroads. She's been promoted to senior counsel, inducted into the inner circle. The women around her, Amanda, Patricia, others, they're already lost to Coke's influence. But Maxine," he paused. "There might still be time to reach her, and if she doesn't want to be reached, then you need to protect yourself," Barry said simply. Because women in Coke's orbit end up in one of three places, completely under his control, permanently relocated abroad, or... He didn't finish the sentence. The coffee shop had started filling with the lunch crowd. Barry quickly packed away his documents, but his words hung heavy in the air. "Think about what I've shown you. Watch for the signs. And remember, Coke didn't just destroy these marriages. He rebuilt these women into something else entirely." Cody remained seated long after Barry left, his coffee growing cold. Everything the retired agent had described fit perfectly with Maxine's transformation. The gradual changes in her appearance and behavior, the new social circle, the increasing disdain for their life together. But it was the photos that haunted him. All those women with perfect smiles and empty eyes, standing beside Coke like trophies in his collection. The thought of Maxine becoming another one of his acquisitions made Cody's blood run cold. The evening sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their suburban home as Cody sorted through old photographs spread across the kitchen table. Each image told the story of Maxine's transformation over the past 5 years, subtle changes that now seemed glaringly obvious. A photo from their 10th anniversary dinner, 5 years ago. Maxine in a simple black dress from Macy's, her smile reaching her eyes as she leaned against Cody's shoulder. Her wedding ring, the modest diamond he'd saved 6 months to buy, sparkled in the restaurant's candlelight. 6 months after joining Coke Industries, Maxine at a charity gala, wearing a designer gown that cost more than their monthly mortgage. The wedding ring had been upgraded to something more appropriate for her position. Her smile was perfect, practiced, never quite reaching her eyes. Last month, Maxine hosting a dinner party for Coke's inner circle. The kitchen's warm oak cabinets had been replaced with sleek modern designs. Her casual clothes had given way to a carefully curated wardrobe of luxury brands. Even her laugh had changed, sharper, more calculated. The sound of a key in the front door pulled Cody from his reverie. Maxine's heels clicked against the hardwood floors, another recent renovation she'd insisted on. The sound stopped abruptly as she entered the kitchen. "What are you doing home?" Her voice carried an edge of irritation. "I thought you had port duty tonight." Cody looked up, really looked at his wife for the first time in months. Her tailored Chanel suit probably cost more than he made in 2 weeks at the port. Diamond earrings, definitely not the ones he'd given her, caught the fading sunlight. Everything about her screamed wealth and sophistication, but her eyes were cold, almost hostile. "Switched shifts," he said quietly. "Thought we could have dinner together. Like we used to." Maxine's perfectly manicured hand brushed dismissively through the air. "I already ate with the team. We were finalizing the Anderson merger documents." "With Coke?" Something flickered across her face. Surprise? Fear? Before her expression smoothed into practiced indifference. "Guillermo was there. Yes? He likes to be hands-on with important deals. Guillermo, Cody repeated. When did he stop being Mr. Coke? Don't start. Maxine moved to the wine fridge, another recent addition, and selected an expensive bottle. He's my mentor. He's invested a lot in my career development, like he invested in Amanda Reynolds, Patricia Sullivan, all those other women in your new circle. The wine bottle clinked sharply against the granite countertop. You've been checking up on me? Trying to understand what happened to my wife. Cody gestured at the photos. The one who believed in justice and integrity. The one who wouldn't have dreamed of spending $5,000 on a handbag while looking down on honest work. That woman was naive. Maxine's knuckles whitened around her wine glass. She didn't understand how the world really works. Guillermo showed me. What exactly did he show you, Max? Cody used her old nickname deliberately, watching her flinch. How to trade your soul for designer labels. How to look down on the man who supported you through law school. You really thought working 2 jobs would make me love you? Her words dripped with venom. While I was stuck in this middle-class prison, my boss has been giving me more than just promotions for years. His mansion makes this house look like a trailer. The cruelty in her voice was calculated, designed to wound. But something in her delivery felt rehearsed, as if she'd practiced this speech in front of Coke's carefully curated audience of ex-wives and soon-to-be ex-wives. Listen to yourself, Cody said quietly. The Maxine I married would never be this cruel. She would never treat anyone this way, let alone her husband. Well, the Maxine you married grew up. She grabbed her purse, another designer piece that cost more than his monthly port salary. I'm staying at the Four Seasons tonight. Don't wait up. She stormed out, the front door slamming with enough force to rattle the wedding photo on the wall. One of the few old pictures she hadn't replaced. In it, they stood outside Tucker Performance on opening day, covered in grease and grinning like fools in love. Cody remained at the kitchen table, surrounded by the photographic evidence of his wife's transformation. The pattern Barry Chapman had described was there in every image. The gradual changes in appearance, the increasing isolation, the growing disdain for their former life. The woman who had just stormed out wasn't his Maxine. She was Coke's creation, shaped by years of subtle manipulation and deliberate corruption. Her cruelty wasn't natural, it was programmed, instilled through countless conversations with other women who'd been through the same transformation. As he cleaned up the shattered wine glass, an expensive crystal piece that had replaced their old everyday glassware, Cody felt the full weight of his loss. The photographs on the table showed more than just Maxine's physical transformation. They documented the systematic dismantling of their marriage, orchestrated by a man who collected wives like others collected cars. The kitchen still held traces of their old life. The coffee maker he'd bought her in law school, a worn cookbook from her grandmother, small reminders of the woman she used to be. But like their marriage, these artifacts were being systematically replaced by cold, expensive alternatives that reflected Coke's influence rather than their shared history. Cody gathered the photos slowly, each image a reminder of what he'd lost. The progression was stark, from a woman who shared his dreams to one who despised them, from a partner to a possession in Coke's carefully curated collection. The final photo, taken just last week at a Coke Industries gala, showed Maxine standing beside her mentor, wearing a smile that belonged to a stranger. The house felt impossibly empty as he moved through it, noticing all the changes he'd somehow missed. Designer throw pillows on the couch where they used to cuddle watching movies. Abstract art replacing their vacation photos. Every surface transformed to erase their history and showcase Maxine's new status. In their bedroom, or rather, her bedroom, since he'd been sleeping in the guest room more often than not, the transformation was complete. His side of the closet had been steadily shrinking, making room for her expanding designer wardrobe. The comfortable queen bed they'd bought together had been replaced by an enormous California king that made him feel like an intruder in his own home. The only thing that remained unchanged was a small silver frame on his nightstand, containing a photo from their first date. In it, Maxine smiled at the camera with unguarded joy, her law school textbooks scattered around her as Cody worked on his first restoration project in the background. That woman, the one who believed in love more than luxury, in partnership more than power, seemed to belong to another lifetime. The night stretched ahead, empty and uncertain. Tomorrow, Maxine would return, probably with another cutting comment about his work or their house or his inability to give her the life she deserved. She would bring with her the practiced disdain she'd learned from Coke's inner circle, the calculated cruelty that had become her armor. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of their unraveling marriage, Cody allowed himself to mourn, not just for the wife he was losing, but for the future they'd planned together. A future that was being systematically erased and rewritten by a man who collected broken marriages like trophies. The old Maxine was disappearing, replaced piece by piece with Coke's carefully constructed ideal. Her transformation was nearly complete, her integration into his world of luxury and manipulation almost absolute. And Cody, with his calloused hands and honest work, had no place in that world. As the night deepened, he placed the photos back in their album, one of the few things Maxine hadn't replaced or discarded. Each image told the story of their marriage's slow dissolution, of Coke's methodical destruction of everything they'd built together. The pattern Barry Chapman had described was there in every frame, turning their love story into another chapter in Coke's collection of conquered lives. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Tucker Performance as Cody examined the latest addition to his client list, a midnight blue Bugatti Chiron, its paint gleaming under the specialized LED lighting. The owner, a hedge fund manager who'd made his fortune in Asian markets, had requested a complete performance upgrade along with their standard GPS security package. Another Coke Industries executive? Nick asked, appearing beside him with a tablet displaying the vehicle's documentation. One of Guillermo's inner circle, Cody confirmed, running his hand along the Chiron's carbon fiber body. Third one this month. Funny how they all insist on using us now. The observation wasn't coincidental. Over the past few months, Tucker Performance had seen a steady increase in high-profile clients connected to Coke Industries. Each vehicle came with explicit instructions for their premium security package, including the GPS tracking system that had become their signature service. Nick scrolled through the work order, his military training evident in his methodical review. Full performance upgrade, security system installation, and, he paused, eyes narrowing, weekly maintenance checks at the client's private garage. Coke's people are particular about their toys. Cody moved to his workbench, where diagrams of recent installations were spread out. They want everything documented, every service recorded. Something about insurance requirements. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Coke's insistence on detailed documentation had created a paper trail that any investigator would dream of. Every vehicle movement, every service record, every modification. All meticulously logged and legally obtained. Remember when you thought working at the port was just about extra income? Nick's voice carried a hint of their shared understanding. After his experience exposing corruption in military contracts, he developed an eye for patterns that others might miss. Cody's port job had evolved far beyond its original purpose. What started as a way to fund Tucker Performance had become a strategic position, providing legitimate access to shipping manifests, import records, and the complex web of luxury car transportation. Speaking of the port, Nick continued, Joyce Baird from Customs has been asking questions about those parts shipments Coke's been bringing in. Says the weight declarations don't match typical luxury car components. Joyce. Cody looked up from the diagrams. The senior customs official who flagged those Range Rover imports last year? Nick nodded. She's been building a file on Coke shipments. Nothing official yet, but she's noticed patterns. Cars declared as parts. Parts declared as electronics. Documentation that looks perfect on the surface, but falls apart under scrutiny. The workshop fell silent except for the gentle hum of diagnostic equipment. Through the windows, they could see their team of technicians working on various exotic cars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Aston Martins. Each vehicle represented a connection, a thread in the network they'd unwittingly built. You know what's interesting about Coke's car collection? Nick moved to the Bugatti, his reflection visible in its polished surface. Every time one of his executives gets a new vehicle, they insist on our GPS package. Full tracking capabilities, movement logging, secure access protocols. All perfectly legal, all clearly stated in the service contracts. Contracts they never actually read, Cody added. remembering how Maxine used to joke about executives who signed anything put in front of them. The memory stung, but it carried a different weight now. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of diagnostic checks and mechanical adjustments. But beneath the routine work, both men were acutely aware of the network they'd created. Every client connection, every port contact, every service record. All pieces of a puzzle they hadn't known they were assembling. Mr. Tucker? Marcus, their lead technician, approached with another tablet. That Lamborghini from Koch Industries is back. Mr. Peterson says it's making an unusual noise during acceleration. Cody exchanged a look with Nick. Peterson was Koch's personal driver, responsible for maintaining his extensive car collection. His frequent visits had become a valuable source of information, though he didn't realize it. "Tell him we'll need it for at least 2 days," Cody replied. "Full diagnostic sweep, just to be thorough." As Marcus walked away, Nick lowered his voice. "Peterson mentioned something interesting last time. Apparently, Koch's been making late-night trips to that private garage of his, the one where he keeps the sensitive documents. The same garage where Maxine's been spending her evenings?" The question came out more bitter than Cody intended. "The same one." Nick's expression hardened. "And here's the thing, every one of those cars has our GPS system. Every trip, every stop, every pattern gets logged. All part of our premium security service." The implications hung in the air. Koch's habit of using his exotic cars as mobile offices, his belief in the privacy of his personal garage, all built on an assumption of security that wasn't quite as absolute as he believed. A commotion at the front of the shop drew their attention. Joyce Baird, her customs ID badge catching the morning light, was making her way through the workshop. Her presence during business hours was unusual. Their conversations about Koch's shipments usually happened in less official settings. "Gentlemen," her professional demeanor couldn't quite hide her urgency. "We need to talk about some inconsistencies in recent vehicle import declarations. Specifically, those connected to Koch Industries." Nick cleared his throat. "My office might be more appropriate for that discussion." As they moved toward the private office space, Cody caught glimpses of their operation from different angles. The high-end cars under their care represented more than just mechanical projects now. Each vehicle was a potential source of information, each client connection a possible link in their growing network. The morning sun continued to rise over Tucker Performance, illuminating a workshop that had become more than just a high-end auto shop. It had become the center of a network of connections spanning the exotic car world, port operations, and the murky dealings of Koch Industries. Through pure coincidence, or perhaps Koch's own arrogance, they built something unique. Their reputation for discretion and expertise had made them the preferred service center for the very people they needed to watch. Their port connections provided legitimate access to shipping records that others couldn't reach, and their meticulous documentation, insisted upon by Koch himself, created a paper trail that no one had thought to question. As Cody followed Nick and Joyce into the office, he realized that his 2 jobs hadn't just been about money. They'd given him a perspective that few others had, a view into both the legitimate and questionable aspects of Koch's operation. Every late night at the port, every weekend at the shop, had been building towards something he hadn't anticipated. The network was in place. The connections were established. All they needed now was to understand the pattern they were seeing and figure out how to use it. The conference room at the SEC's Manhattan office felt impossibly small for the weight of information it contained. Jay Martin, his tie loosened after hours of reviewing documents, spread another set of shipping manifests across the table. Each paper represented a piece of the puzzle they'd been trying to solve for 3 years. "The problem isn't finding irregularities," Jay explained, gesturing to the scattered documents. "It's proving intent. Koch's setup is brilliant in its simplicity. He uses people's marriages as leverage. Spouses sign documents, create plausible deniability. By the time we build a case, key witnesses are usually living in countries without extradition." Cody studied the manifests, his experience from the port allowing him to spot the discrepancies immediately. Luxury cars declared as parts shipments. Weight calculations that didn't match the stated contents. Documentation that looked perfect until you knew what to look for. "Here's where it gets interesting," Joyce Baird interjected, pulling out her own files. The senior customs official had been tracking Koch's shipments for months. "The paperwork is always immaculate. too immaculate. Every form filed correctly, every box checked, every signature in place. But the actual contents, she shook her head. Last month, we had a Rolls-Royce Phantom declared as automotive components. The weight difference alone should have raised flags. Nick Dillon, who had been quietly observing from the corner, moved to examine the documents more closely. His military intelligence background brought a different perspective to the patterns. It's not just the cars, he noted, pointing to specific entries. Look at the timing. Every major shipment coincides with significant corporate events. Mergers, acquisitions, sudden leadership changes. And each time, there's a connection to one of the women in Koch's inner circle. Jay nodded grimly. That's where he's clever. He uses the wives, usually lawyers or financial experts, to handle the sensitive parts of each transaction. Their signatures make everything look legitimate. Their professional credentials add a layer of authenticity, and their personal stake in keeping quiet. He trailed off, meeting Cody's eyes with understanding. The implications were clear. Maxine's rapid rise through Koch's legal department hadn't just been about career advancement. Her signature appeared on countless documents, her professional reputation lending credibility to transactions that might otherwise have drawn scrutiny. The pattern goes deeper than just shipping fraud, Joyce continued, pulling up digital records on her laptop. These vehicles, they're not just luxury items. They're mobile offices, document storage, meeting spaces. Koch believes his private garage is secure, that his cars are safe from prying eyes. But every time one of these vehicles moves, we know about it, Nick finished. Every GPS tracker we install, every security system we maintain, it's all documented in the service contracts. Contracts that Koch's people sign without reading, because they trust Tucker Performance's reputation. The revelation hung in the air. Koch's own paranoia about vehicle security had created the very system that could expose his operations. Every car service, every garage visit, every unauthorized modification, all meticulously logged as part of their standard procedures. Here's what we know, Jay summarized, organizing the documents into distinct piles. Koch targets married women in key professional positions, promotes them rapidly, mentors them personally, gets them involved in his legitimate business operations first, then gradually pulls them into questionable transactions. By the time they realize they're compromised, they're too deep to back out. Joyce picked up the thread. The vehicles are key. He uses his car collection as cover for moving sensitive materials. The women in his inner circle handle the documentation, making everything appear legitimate. Their professional credentials and personal relationships create layers of deniability. And when someone threatens to expose the system, Nick's question carried the weight of his military experience. They disappear, Jay said flatly. Transfer to overseas offices, generous consulting contracts in countries without extradition treaties. Or in some cases, he glanced at a file marked with a red flag. Accidents happen. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the office windows as they continued piecing together the pattern. Each document, each shipping record, each GPS log added another layer to their understanding of Koch's operation. The problem isn't just proving what he's doing, Joyce explained, frustration evident in her voice. It's proving it in a way that will stand up in court. These women, they're not just victims. Many of them have become active participants, using their legal and financial expertise to help Koch expand his operations. Jay nodded in agreement. Every time we get close to building a case, key witnesses vanish overseas. Supporting documents disappear. And the women who remain, they're too compromised to testify. Their signatures are on too many papers, their professional reputations too intertwined with Koch's success or failure, Nick added quietly. The weight of that observation settled over the room. Koch's system wasn't just about business fraud or shipping irregularities. It was about creating a web of complicity, using personal relationships and professional ambitions to ensure silence. But he's getting careless, Joyce noted, highlighting specific entries in the shipping logs. The discrepancies are becoming more obvious. The documentation, while perfect on the surface, shows patterns that can't be explained away. He's confident, maybe too confident, in his system's security. As the meeting continued, each participant contributed their unique perspective to the emerging picture. Jay's SEC investigation provided the regulatory framework. Joyce's customs experience highlighted the shipping irregularities. Nick's military intelligence background helped identify patterns in the data. And Cody's position, straddling the worlds of luxury cars and port operations, offered insights that none of them could have gained individually. His legitimate access to Koch's vehicles, combined with his understanding of shipping procedures, filled gaps in their knowledge that might otherwise have remained hidden. The pattern was clear now. Koch's operation wasn't just about financial fraud or shipping irregularities. It was a sophisticated system of control and compromise, using personal relationships as leverage and professional credentials as cover. The cars, the documents, the overseas transfers, all pieces of a larger scheme that had remained hidden in plain sight. As the day drew to a close, the team began gathering their respective documents. The pattern had emerged, clear and disturbing in its implications. Now they needed to find a way to expose it, without putting more lives at risk in the process. The private office above Tucker Performance had become their unofficial command center. Over 18 months, its walls had gradually filled with shipping manifests, GPS tracking data, and service records, each document a piece of the puzzle they were assembling. The evidence was gathered legally, methodically, through the normal course of business operations. Nick stood before the main display board, where a timeline of Koch's vehicle movements intersected with significant corporate events. Red strings connected specific cars to particular transactions, creating a web of connections that became clearer with each passing week. "Here's what we know for certain," he began, addressing the small group gathered in the office. Koch uses his exotic car collection for more than just showing off. Each vehicle serves a specific purpose in his operation. Joyce Baird nodded, adding her customs expertise to the analysis. The shipping manifests prove it. Cars declared as parts, parts declared as electronics. But the GPS data shows these vehicles making regular trips to locations associated with major corporate deals. The evidence had accumulated naturally through their legitimate business operations. Every car service was documented as part of Tucker Performance's standard procedures. Every shipping manifest was properly filed through Cody's port position. Koch's hubris had made him careless. He used his exotic cars to transport sensitive documents, believing his private garage kept them secure. "The GPS tracking is the key," Nick continued, pointing to specific data points. "Every vehicle in Koch's fleet has our security system installed. Standard protection against theft and unauthorized use. All properly disclosed in service contracts that his people signed without reading." Cody examined the latest addition to their evidence wall, detailed logs from Koch's personal Lamborghini Aventador. The car had visited his private garage 3 times in the past week, each trip coinciding with major corporate announcements. "Look at these patterns," Joyce noted, comparing the vehicle logs to her customs records. "Every time there's a questionable shipment, one of Koch's cars makes multiple trips between his office and that private garage. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence." The evidence gathering had been painstaking, deliberate. They'd followed every legal procedure, documented every step. Koch's own insistence on detailed record-keeping had worked against him, creating a paper trail that grew stronger with each passing day. "The women are the key," Jay Martin observed, reviewing financial documents from his SEC investigation. Koch uses their professional credentials to legitimize his transactions. Their signatures appear on critical documents. Their reputations add credibility to questionable deals. The afternoon light filtered through the office windows as they continued analyzing the patterns. Every piece of evidence was properly obtained, every document legally accessed through their respective positions. Koch's belief in his system's security had made him blind to the very network that was documenting his activities. "Here's something interesting," Nick said, pulling up recent GPS data. Koch's cars have been making late-night visits to locations where whistleblowers were last seen. The tracking logs show consistent patterns, always after hours, always following specific routes to avoid main roads. Joyce cross-referenced the information with her customs files. "And look at the timing. Each of these trips corresponds with a major shipment declaration. Cars listed as parts, weight calculations that don't match the manifests. But the paperwork is always perfect." The evidence wall told a story that became clearer with each new addition. Coke's vehicle movements, tracked through legitimate security systems. Shipping irregularities, documented through proper channels. Financial discrepancies, noted in standard SEC filings. All pieces of a larger pattern that had remained hidden until viewed together. He's getting sloppy, Jay observed, examining recent transaction records. The confidence that nothing can touch him, it's making him careless. The patterns are becoming more obvious, the connections easier to trace. Cody studied the timeline they constructed. Every service record from Tucker Performance, every shipping manifest from the port, every GPS log from their security systems. All obtained legally, all properly documented. Coke's own perfectionism had created the very evidence trail they needed. As evening approached, the team began organizing their findings. The evidence was substantial, gathered through legitimate business operations over 18 months of patient observation. Coke's hubris, his belief that his private garage and exotic cars provided perfect security, had been his weakness. The GPS tracking had documented every trip, every stop, every pattern. All completely legal, all properly disclosed in the service contracts that Coke's organization had signed without a second thought. Let's review what we have, Jay said, spreading the most recent documents across the conference table. 18 months of GPS tracking data from Coke's entire fleet. Every car's movements logged, every stop documented. All obtained through legitimate security services. Joyce added her customs files to the collection. Shipping manifest showing systematic irregularities. Weight discrepancies that can't be explained by normal cargo variations. Documentation that's suspiciously perfect. The kind of perfect that comes from having legal experts review every detail. And the garage visits, Nick noted, pointing to specific GPS logs. Late-night stops that coincide with major corporate events. Multiple vehicles moving sensitive materials under the cover of darkness. All tracked by our standard security package. The evidence painted a clear picture. Coke's belief in his system's invulnerability had led him to overlook the very tools being used to document his activities. Every luxury car in his fleet had become a data point, every garage visit another piece of the puzzle. The vehicle service records are particularly interesting, Cody observed, reviewing Tucker Performance's documentation. Each time we install a new security system or perform maintenance, the contracts are signed without question. They trust our reputation so completely, they never consider what they're authorizing. The team worked late into the night, organizing their findings into clear, documented patterns. Each piece of evidence had been obtained through proper channels, each document gathered as part of their normal business operations. Coke's own insistence on using high-end vehicles for sensitive operations had created a trail they could follow. It's all here, Jay finally said, surveying their assembled evidence. The shipping fraud, the document transfers, the pattern of using these women's professional credentials to legitimize questionable transactions. All documented through completely legal means. As they prepared to wrap up for the night, each team member took responsibility for securing their portion of the evidence. These documents represented 18 months of patient observation, of working within the system to expose its flaws. Coke's arrogance had made him careless, but their methodical approach had turned that carelessness into concrete evidence. The lights of Tucker Performance cast long shadows through the office windows as the team departed. The evidence wall stood as testament to their work, a complex web of connections, all documented through legitimate business operations. Coke's own vehicles had become the key to understanding his operations, each GPS tracker silently logging the patterns he thought were hidden. Tomorrow would bring new data, new patterns to analyze. But for now, they had solid evidence of Coke's activities, gathered through patience and attention to detail. His belief in his private garage's security had blinded him to the very system documenting his movements. Sometimes, Cody reflected, the best security weakness was simply assuming you didn't have any. The federal building's conference room buzzed with focused energy as agents from multiple agencies gathered around the evidence wall. 2 years of meticulous investigation had led to this moment. Special Agent Sarah Richardson from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division studied the intricate web of documents, photos, and connection maps that covered every available surface. "Walk me through it again," she directed, her eyes fixed on the timeline of vehicle movements. Start with the GPS data. Cody Tucker stepped forward, his hands still bearing the calluses of his trade. The past 2 years had aged him, but his eyes held a determined clarity. Every luxury vehicle serviced by Tucker Performance receives our standard GPS security package. It's all documented in the service contracts, tracking capabilities, movement logging, security protocols. Nick Dillon, his military bearing unchanged, pulled up a series of digital maps on the main screen. These are Coke's vehicle movements over the past 2 years. Red dots indicate his private garage. Blue shows corporate locations. Yellow marks places where whistleblowers were last seen. The pattern was unmistakable. Regular late-night trips between locations, always following indirect routes to avoid main thoroughfares. Each movement corresponded with significant corporate events or disappearances. And the shipping records? Agent Richardson asked, turning to Joyce Baird. The senior customs official spread out a collection of manifests. Systematic fraud spanning years. Luxury vehicles declared as parts shipments. Weight discrepancies that can't be explained by legitimate cargo. Everything perfectly documented, but fundamentally false. Barry Chapman, his investigator's instincts sharpened by personal stakes, added his own findings. We've documented regular late-night meetings at Coke's private garage. Multiple women from his inner circle handling sensitive materials, including my daughter and Maxine Tucker. The surveillance photos told their own story. Women in designer clothes carrying document boxes between exotic cars. Each face familiar from Coke's corporate events, each movement captured with methodical precision. The timing is crucial, Jay Martin from the SEC noted, highlighting specific dates. Every major corporate transaction coincides with these garage meetings. Mergers, acquisitions, sudden leadership changes. All connected to nights when Coke's cars were moving documents. Agent Richardson studied the vehicle tracking data. And all this GPS information. It's legally obtained? Standard security features, Cody confirmed. Every client signs off on it during vehicle service. The contracts explicitly state our tracking capabilities. Coke's people never questioned it. They trusted our reputation too much to read the fine print. Nick pulled up another set of records. We've documented unusual cargo weights, unauthorized modifications, patterns of movement that make no sense for personal or business use. All logged as part of our normal security protocols. The evidence was overwhelming in its detail. Years of GPS tracking data showed Coke's vehicles visiting locations where whistleblowers had last been seen. Shipping manifests proved systematic customs fraud. Security logs documented patterns of suspicious activity that couldn't be explained away. The wives are key, Barry added, his voice carrying the weight of personal loss. Coke used their professional credentials to legitimize his operations. Their signatures appear on critical documents, their reputations lending credibility to questionable transactions. Joyce nodded in agreement. The legal team's brilliance was using these women's expertise against them. Once they signed off on enough documents, they were too compromised to come forward. Their professional reputations became hostages. Agent Richardson moved to examine the surveillance photos more closely. The images showed Maxine Tucker entering Coke's garage late at night, carrying files marked with corporate seals. Her designer outfit and confident posture betrayed no hint of the legal jeopardy she was creating for herself. When did you first notice the document transfers? She asked Barry. About 6 months into the surveillance, he replied, pulling out a specific series of photos. Coke got careless. Started using his private garage as a document repository. Thought the combination of legal expertise and exotic cars made him untouchable. The investigation team worked through the night, organizing evidence for the upcoming operation. Each piece had been legally obtained through legitimate business practices. Coke's own insistence on perfect documentation had created the paper trail that would expose his activities. The GPS tracking is our strongest evidence, Nick explained, highlighting specific patterns. Every trip, every stop, every unusual movement, all logged and time-stamped. Coke's people signed contracts authorizing this surveillance without ever realizing what they were approving. Agent Richardson studied the comprehensive timeline they'd assembled. And the women involved, how many are we looking at? At least 12 in the inner circle, Barry answered, spreading out photos of Coke's corporate events. All followed the same pattern. Hired for their expertise, promoted rapidly, gradually drawn into questionable transactions. By the time they realized they were compromised, they were too deeply involved to escape. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic corruption. Coke had built his operation on a foundation of manipulated relationships and professional compromise. The very women he'd mentored had become both his accomplices and his insurance against exposure. The vehicle import scheme was just the beginning, Joyce added, highlighting specific customs declarations. Once we started connecting the dots between shipping fraud and document transfers, the whole pattern emerged. Coke wasn't just moving cars. He was moving evidence of much larger crimes. As dawn approached, Agent Richardson made her final notes. The investigation had been masterfully conducted, each piece of evidence obtained through legitimate channels. Coke's belief in his own invulnerability had led him to overlook the very systems documenting his activities. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the conference room windows, illuminating the wall of evidence that would soon bring down one of the most sophisticated corporate corruption schemes the agency had encountered. 2 years of patient investigation had revealed not just criminal activity, but a systematic abuse of trust, power, and relationships. Barry Chapman took a final look at the surveillance photos, his eyes lingering on images of his daughter and other women caught in Coke's web. The investigation would expose more than just corporate fraud. It would reveal the human cost of Coke's manipulation, the lives and marriages he'd destroyed in pursuit of power and control. The team dispersed as morning arrived, each member carrying copies of their evidence for safekeeping. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of their work, but tonight had proved the strength of their case. Coke's arrogance in believing his garage impregnable, his cars untraceable, had been his ultimate weakness. The morning sun hadn't yet touched the horizon when federal agents surrounded Coke Industries' headquarters. The culmination of years of investigation was unfolding with military precision. Agent Richardson coordinated from a mobile command center, monitoring feeds from multiple teams. All units in position, crackled the radio. Awaiting your order. Inside his mansion, Guillermo Coke was already awake, his morning routine unchanged despite the net closing around him. The silver-haired executive adjusted his Italian silk tie, unaware that his private garage, the sanctuary he believed impregnable, was already under federal control. The first indication something was wrong came when his Bentley wouldn't start. The GPS system, installed by Tucker Performance as a security measure, had been remotely disabled. Each of his prized vehicles, scattered across multiple locations, was similarly immobilized. Target is moving to secondary vehicle, reported a surveillance team. All GPS systems confirm lockdown. Coke's phone buzzed with increasingly urgent messages. Federal agents at corporate headquarters, others at his private garage. His carefully constructed world was unraveling with synchronized precision. In her four-season suite, Maxine Tucker watched the news unfold on multiple channels. Her hands trembled as she recognized the federal agents escorting her colleagues from Coke Industries in handcuffs. The designer briefcase she'd used to carry sensitive documents lay open, papers scattered across the luxury suite's floor. Mrs. Tucker? Agent Richardson's voice carried authority as she entered the suite, warrant in hand. We need to discuss your role in Coke Industries operations. Across the city, similar scenes played out. Amanda Reynolds attempted to board a private jet, only to find federal agents waiting at the hangar. Patricia Sullivan, who'd helped structure the fraudulent shipping documents, was intercepted at the Canadian border. Back at Coke's mansion, the evidence retrieval team worked methodically. Sir, a tech specialist called out, "You need to see this." Agent Richardson approached the garage's hidden document room. Behind a panel of exotic car memorabilia, they found files detailing years of systematic fraud. Each document bore signatures from Coke's inner circle of compromised professionals, women whose expertise had been twisted to serve his schemes. The GPS data was right, Nick Dillon confirmed, reviewing tracking logs from his tablet. Every late-night meeting, every document transfer, it all matches the vehicle movements we recorded. Coke's arrest came as dawn broke over the city. The man who'd built an empire on manipulation and control seemed smaller somehow, his aristocratic bearing diminished by standard-issue handcuffs. You really think your mechanic's GPS toys can touch me? He sneered at Agent Richardson. I have connections you can't imagine. Those connections are being arrested as we speak, she replied calmly. Your entire operation is exposed. The GPS tracking you authorized? It documented every meeting, every document transfer, every attempt to silence whistleblowers. In the federal building's interview room, Maxine Tucker faced the reality of her situation. The evidence against her was overwhelming: years of signatures on fraudulent documents, late-night meetings captured by surveillance, her legal expertise used to facilitate coke schemes. I didn't know at first, she whispered, her designer outfit incongruous in the stark room. By the time I realized what was happening, I was too involved. He knew exactly how to use our ambitions against us. The investigation team worked through the seized documents. Each file revealed new layers of corruption. Koch had used his fleet of luxury vehicles not just as status symbols, but as mobile evidence vaults. The GPS tracking data matched perfectly with document transfers, whistleblower disappearances, and suspicious financial transactions. The arrogance is astounding, J. Martin noted, reviewing transaction records. He really believed his private garage was secure, that his cars were untraceable. Never occurred to him that the same security features he insisted on would be his undoing. Joyce Baird's customs records proved crucial. Years of fraudulent shipping declarations, all perfectly documented by Koch's own legal team. The weight discrepancies alone would have been damning. Combined with the GPS data and surveillance photos, they were devastating. It's not just about the fraud, Barry Chapman observed, watching another of Koch's inner circle being processed. He deliberately targeted women with professional credentials, used their expertise to legitimize his operations. Once they signed enough documents, they couldn't escape without destroying themselves. The evidence mounted as the day progressed. Koch's private garage yielded documented proof of systematic customs fraud, corporate espionage, and witness tampering. Each luxury vehicle in his collection had unknowingly carried a digital record of his crimes, every movement logged by Tucker Performance's GPS systems. Maxine's cooperation, though late, provided context for the evidence. The garage meetings were key, she explained, her composure cracking. He used different cars for different types of documents. The Bentley for financial records, the Ferrari for corporate takeover plans. He thought he was being clever, but the GPS tracking caught it all. By nightfall, the full scope of Koch's operation lay exposed. The GPS data showed his cars visiting locations where whistleblowers had disappeared. Shipping manifests proved years of systematic fraud. The women he'd manipulated into complicity faced their own reckonings, their professional reputations in tatters. You built quite a system, Agent Richardson commented during Koch's final interview. Used people's marriages as leverage, their professional credentials as cover. Never occurred to you that the same attention to detail would be your downfall? Koch's response was a cold stare, his arrogance intact even in defeat. But the evidence was irrefutable. Years of GPS tracking data, shipping records, and surveillance photos painted a picture of systematic corruption that no amount of legal maneuvering could erase. The investigation team gathered one final time, reviewing the day's operations. Koch's empire had fallen, his carefully constructed web of influence and intimidation exposed by the very systems he'd trusted. His belief in his own invulnerability, in the security of his private garage and luxury fleet, had blinded him to the evidence accumulating against him. 18 months of trials had taken their toll on everyone involved. The federal courthouse had become a second home to the investigation team, each day bringing new revelations of Koch's extensive corruption. The prosecution's case, built on years of meticulously gathered evidence, proved insurmountable. The sentencing hearing drew national attention. Koch, his silver hair now streaked with gray from prison stress, maintained his aristocratic bearing even as Judge Martinez read the verdict. 20 years for crimes ranging from fraud to conspiracy, the maximum sentence for each count, to run consecutively. The court finds the systematic nature of these crimes particularly egregious, Judge Martinez declared, her voice carrying through the packed courtroom. The defendant not only orchestrated massive financial fraud, but deliberately corrupted professional women, using their expertise and relationships as tools for criminal enterprise. Maxine Tucker, despite her cooperation with prosecutors, received an 8-year sentence for her role in the legal cover-ups. Her designer courtroom attire couldn't hide the toll of the trials. The woman who had once looked down on an honest mechanic's work now faced years in federal prison. The aftermath of Koch's fall rippled through multiple industries. His car collection, seized by federal authorities, revealed additional layers of criminal enterprise. Many vehicles, purchased with laundered money, proved difficult to sell to legitimate buyers. The irony, Nick commented to Cody as they reviewed auction documents, is that our service records are actually helping the feds. Clean maintenance history makes these cars more attractive to buyers who don't want legal complications. Tucker Performance's reputation for meticulous documentation, once exploited by Koch, now worked in their favor. The shop's cleaning service records provided clear provenance for vehicles otherwise tainted by their former owner's crimes. Elena Haas, an investigative journalist who'd followed the case from the beginning, spent months interviewing everyone involved. Her office walls were covered with timeline charts and connection maps, each telling a part of Koch's story. It wasn't just about the money, she explained during one of their interviews. Koch's pattern of destroying marriages wasn't simply desire or control. He used relationship trauma to compromise people, make them complicit. The psychological manipulation was as systematic as the financial fraud. The human cost of Koch's schemes became clearer as more victims came forward. Women who'd lost careers, marriages, and reputations shared similar stories of gradual corruption. Koch's technique of using professional ambition as a weapon had created deep wounds in multiple lives. Joyce Baird's role in exposing the corruption led to a promotion within customs enforcement. Her understanding of both the technical and human aspects of Koch's operation proved invaluable in developing new protocols to prevent similar schemes. The modest house that Maxine had once despised found new purpose. Working with Barry Chapman and other victims' families, Cody converted it into a temporary shelter for women leaving abusive corporate environments. The same rooms that had witnessed Maxine's transformation now hosted support groups and counseling sessions. Sometimes, Cody reflected during a shelter meeting, the best revenge is building something positive from the ashes of betrayal. The lessons learned from Koch's fall led to significant changes in corporate oversight. GPS tracking requirements for luxury vehicles became standard in high-end car services. Legal firms implemented stricter reviews of document signing protocols. The pattern Koch had exploited, using professional women's expertise against them, became a cautionary tale in ethics training. 5 years after the trials, Tucker Performance had evolved beyond its origins. The shop's reputation for integrity attracted clients who appreciated both technical expertise and ethical business practices. The port operation, once a source of extra income, grew into a legitimate import-export consulting firm specializing in regulatory compliance. Barry Chapman's daughter, like many of Koch's former inner circle, worked to rebuild her life abroad. The process of healing proved as complex as the corruption that had ensnared them. Some found redemption in helping others avoid similar traps. Others, like Maxine, faced longer journeys of accountability and reflection. The final irony lay in Koch's own blindness to his vulnerability. His belief that wealth and influence made him untouchable had led him to overlook the very systems documenting his crimes. The same attention to detail that built his corrupt empire ultimately exposed it. Elena Haas's book about the case became required reading in corporate ethics courses. Koch's true innovation, she wrote, was weaponizing professional women's ambitions and relationships. He understood that corruption is most effective when it's gradual, when each compromise seems small until the cumulative weight becomes unbearable. The impact of Koch's fall continued to resonate through multiple communities. His victims found different paths forward, some through advocacy, others through quiet rebuilding of interrupted lives. The modest shelter in Cody's former home became a symbol of transformation, proving that even the darkest experiences could lead to positive change. Joyce Baird's commitment to integrity in both personal and professional life resonated deeply with Cody. Their shared experience fighting Koch's corruption created a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. In time, their collaboration on preventing similar schemes evolved into a deeper connection. Looking back, Cody recognized that Koch's greatest miscalculation wasn't underestimating the GPS tracking or the customs records. It was believing that broken relationships and compromised integrity were acceptable costs of doing business. The network that exposed him had been built on the very values he dismissed: honesty, dedication, and genuine human connection. The shelter's success stories accumulated over time. Women who'd once been part of Coke's inner circle found their way back to authentic lives. The designer clothes and luxury trappings that had once seemed so important gave way to more meaningful measures of success. Some returned to their original professions, this time on their own terms. Others found new purpose in helping prevent similar exploitation. Joyce understood the importance of this transformation better than most. Her years in customs enforcement had shown her how easily integrity could be compromised in small, seemingly insignificant steps. Their shared commitment to justice had drawn her and Cody together, building a relationship founded on mutual respect and shared values. "You know what Coke never understood?" Joyce remarked one evening, as they watched the sunset from the shelter's back porch. "Real power isn't about controlling people. It's about helping them find their strength." The modest house that Maxine had once considered beneath her now stood as a testament to that philosophy. Each room held stories of recovery and renewal. The kitchen where Maxine had shattered her wine glass in contempt now hosted community dinners for women rebuilding their lives. The living room where she dismissed their marriage now witnessed healing conversations and newfound friendships. Tucker performance evolved as well. The shop's reputation attracted clients who valued more than just technical expertise. The GPS tracking systems that had exposed Coke's crimes became industry standard, their installation now a symbol of transparency and security. The port consulting operation grew into a model for ethical import-export practices. Sometimes, during quiet moments between clients or shelter residents, Cody would remember the younger version of himself, the man who'd worked 2 jobs trying to keep up with Maxine's escalating demands. The lessons learned through Coke's fall had taught him that true worth couldn't be measured in designer labels or luxury cars. The story of Coke's downfall became more than just a cautionary tale of corporate corruption. It demonstrated how the very systems meant to protect wealth and power could expose their abuse. More importantly, it showed how people could rebuild from betrayal, creating something meaningful from the ashes of broken trust. The best revenge, Cody often told new shelter residents, isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. About building something positive from what tried to break you. In the end, Coke's empire of manipulation and control crumbled not through dramatic confrontation, but through the patient accumulation of truth. The GPS tracks of his luxury cars, the meticulous service records, the customs documents, each piece contributed to exposing a system that had seemed untouchable. The modest house remained a symbol of transformation, its rooms filled with the quiet work of rebuilding lives. Sometimes, Cody reflected, the most powerful changes came not from grand gestures, but from small acts of integrity repeated day after day. In that way, every woman who found her way back to authenticity through the shelter's doors was writing her own story of victory over Coke's legacy of corruption. Epilogue. 10 years later, the Manhattan skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Tucker Enterprises' new headquarters. The building, a testament to legitimate success, housed both the expanded Tucker Performance operations and their thriving import-export consulting division. Cody Tucker, now approaching 45, stood at the window of his corner office, watching a Ferrari being unloaded from a shipping container at the nearby port, a sight that carried very different meanings now than it had a decade ago. "Mr. Tucker?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Elena Haas is here for the interview." The investigative journalist had aged gracefully over the past decade, her reputation built largely on her comprehensive coverage of the Coke industry scandal. Her latest book, The Garage, Inside Coke's Empire of Corruption, was being adapted into a major documentary. 10 years, Elena remarked, setting up her recording equipment. "Hard to believe it's been that long since the trials ended." Cody settled into his chair, his wedding ring, a simple gold band that meant more than any luxury item ever could, catching the afternoon light. Some days it feels like yesterday. Others, like another lifetime entirely. "Let's start with the most obvious follow-up," Elena suggested. "Maxine was released 2 years ago. Have you had any contact?" "None directly," Cody replied, his voice measured. The shelter got a letter from her about 6 months ago. She's working at a legal aid clinic in Seattle, helping women navigate corporate whistleblower situations. Irony isn't lost on anyone. The story of Maxine Tucker's fall and attempted redemption had become a cautionary tale in corporate ethics courses. After serving 6 years of her 8-year sentence, reduced for cooperation, she'd emerged a changed woman. The designer clothes and social climbing ambitions had been replaced by a genuine desire to prevent others from following her path. And Koch himself? Still serving his 20-year sentence in federal prison. The appeals failed, one after another. His empire's been completely dismantled. The most recent audit showed over $300 million in hidden assets seized and redistributed. Elena made notes, though she knew most of this from her research. The women from his inner circle. Have you kept track through the shelter? Joyce has better records than I do, Cody said, smiling at the mention of his wife of 7 years. Amanda Reynolds runs a consulting firm helping companies identify predatory corporate practices. Patricia Sullivan started a support group for women rebuilding their careers after corporate abuse. Even Sarah Chapman Barry's daughter is back from Dubai, working with the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division. The shelter had evolved into a full-fledged nonprofit organization, operating in multiple cities. The modest house where it all began still served as their flagship location, its rooms now professionally equipped to help women transition from corporate abuse situations. Barry must be proud, Elena observed. He's actually on the organization's board now, retired from private investigation, but his experience helps us identify warning signs. He and Sarah have rebuilt their relationship. They're making up for lost time with the grandkids. The conversation turned to Nick Dillon, who had transformed Tucker Performance's security division into an industry leader in corporate transparency solutions. The GPS tracking system that had exposed Koch's activities was now standard practice in luxury vehicle services nationwide. The industry changes were significant, Cody explained. Every high-end auto shop now has strict documentation requirements. The port authorities implemented new verification protocols for vehicle imports. Koch's methods wouldn't work today. Elena's research had revealed the ripple effects of Koch's fall. Several other corporate leaders had been exposed using similar tactics. The combination of professional manipulation and personal corruption that Koch had perfected became known in law enforcement circles as the Garage Gambit. Joyce mentioned something interesting, Elena said, checking her notes. About the auction of Koch's car collection? Cody smiled at the memory. That was an unexpected twist. Most legitimate buyers wouldn't touch the vehicles, too much criminal history. But our clean service records made them viable for law enforcement training. Half of Koch's former fleet is now used to teach federal agents about vehicle-based evidence gathering. The conversation shifted to Tucker Enterprises' growth. The port operation had evolved into a consulting powerhouse, helping companies navigate legitimate import-export practices. Tucker Performance remained the East Coast's premier exotic car service center, but with an added emphasis on corporate transparency. Your new wife, Elena ventured carefully. She was instrumental in Koch's downfall, wasn't she? Joyce saw the patterns in the customs data first, Cody confirmed. She understood corruption from the inside out. When we started working together on prevention programs at the shelter, we realized we shared more than just professional goals. Their relationship had grown naturally from shared values and experiences. Joyce Baird Tucker now divided her time between her senior role at Customs Enforcement and directing the shelter's expansion efforts. Their wedding, held in the shelter's garden, had been attended by many of the women they'd helped rebuild their lives. And the house? Elena asked, knowing its significance in the story. Still serves as our main shelter location. Maxine's old designer kitchen now hosts cooking therapy sessions. The living room where she demanded divorce is a counseling center. Sometimes the best healing comes from transforming spaces that hold painful memories. The interview continued as afternoon faded into evening. They discussed the broader impacts, changes in corporate culture, new protective legislation, evolving approaches to professional women's empowerment. Koch's fall had sparked a national conversation about the intersection of personal and professional manipulation. There's something poetic, Elena observed, about how it all came back to the garage. Koch thought he was collecting lives like he collected cars, pristine, controlled, perfectly maintained. never realized his own perfectionism would expose him. Cody nodded, remembering the years of meticulous documentation that had brought down an empire. The GPS tracking was just technology. The real evidence was in the patterns. How he systematically corrupted people, used their relationships as leverage, turned their ambitions against them. As they wrapped up the interview, Elena asked about the future. The shelter was expanding to international locations, helping women recognize and escape corporate abuse situations. Tucker Enterprises had become a model for ethical business practices, and the legacy of Coke's fall continued to influence corporate oversight. "Any contact with other former associates?" she inquired. Most of Coke's inner circle either served time or turned state's evidence. Some, like Maxine, are trying to make amends. Others disappeared into new lives abroad. The ones who stayed, they're doing what they can to prevent history from repeating. The documentary project would capture not just the scandal, but its lasting impact on multiple lives. Coke's victims had become advocates, his methods had become warnings, and the systems he'd exploited had been strengthened against future abuse. Later that evening, Cody joined Joyce at their home, a comfortable but modest house chosen for its proximity to the shelter. The designer excesses Maxine had craved seemed like artifacts from another life. Their walls held photos of shelter successes, family gatherings, and the quiet moments that made up a genuine life. Elena asked about Maxine's letter. He told Joyce as they prepared dinner together. "Still feels strange, knowing she's out there trying to make amends." Joyce understood the complexity of redemption better than most. Her years dealing with corporate corruption had taught her that change was possible, but never simple. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who learn the hardest lessons. The shelter's evening support group could be heard through the open windows, women's voices sharing stories of recovery and renewal. Each one represented a life pulled back from Coke's web of manipulation, a future reclaimed from his pattern of corruption. 10 years had transformed not just lives, but entire systems. Tucker Enterprises' success proved that ethical business practices could thrive. The shelter's growth showed how personal trauma could fuel positive change, and the ongoing ripples from Coke's fall continued to shape corporate culture. Barry Chapman still dropped by regularly. His investigators' instincts now turned to identifying potential victims before they were fully ensnared. Nick Dillon's security innovations had created new standards for corporate transparency. Even Jay Martin, though retired from the SEC, consulted on cases involving similar patterns of corruption. The garage that had once hidden Coke's secrets now served as a training facility for federal agents, its high-tech security systems teaching new investigators about digital evidence gathering. The exotic cars that had once transported damning documents now helped prevent similar crimes. As night fell over the city, Cody and Joyce walked through the shelter's garden, the same space where they'd exchanged vows years ago. The modest house that Maxine had despised had become a symbol of authentic success, its rooms filled with the hard but essential work of rebuilding lives. "You know what Coke never understood?" Joyce mused, echoing a conversation they'd had years ago. "Real power isn't in what you can take from people. It's in what you can help them become." The evening support group was ending, women emerging from the shelter with renewed determination in their steps. Each one carried a piece of the story. The dangers of compromised integrity, the possibility of redemption, the strength found in genuine connections. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more women needing help, more companies seeking ethical guidance, more lives touching the ripples of Coke's fall. But tonight, in the garden of a house that had witnessed both corruption and healing, the legacy of their stand against systematic abuse continued to grow. Sometimes, Cody reflected, the most powerful changes come not from dramatic moments, but from the patient accumulation of right choices. In that way, every woman who found strength in the shelter, every business that chose transparency over deception, every relationship built on genuine value rather than manipulation, was writing a new chapter in the story of Coke's fall. The Manhattan skyline glittered in the distance, its lights now representing something different than they had a decade ago. Not the false glamour that had seduced Maxine, but the genuine success that came from building something worthwhile. Tucker Enterprises stood as proof that ethical business could thrive. The shelter showed how personal pain could fuel positive change. and their marriage demonstrated that authentic connections could grow even in the aftermath of betrayal. 10 years had changed everything, yet the core truth remained. The best revenge wasn't in destroying what had hurt you, but in building something better from the experience. In that way, Koch's greatest legacy wasn't the empire he'd lost, but the positive changes his fall had inspired in countless lives he'd never meant to touch. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.